All right, welcome back. Hello, everyone. I'm Frederica Whitfield. All right, so we are in day 30 of the longest partial U.S. government shutdown in history, and still no end in sight. President Trump had high hopes for his new proposal to reopen the government.
In recent weeks, we have met with large numbers of Democrat lawmakers to hear their ideas and suggestions. By incorporating the priorities of rank-and-file Democrats in our plan, we hope they will offer their enthusiastic support, and I think many will. This is a common-sense compromise both parties should embrace.
But after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called that proposal unacceptable and a non-starter, President Trump is now flipping the script and going on the attack. He's blaming the Democrats and Pelosi for the shutdown, leaving us still at square one. And as politicians play the blame game, real people are feeling the impacts, caught in the middle of this mess. 800,000 federal workers, most of them still not getting paid, many still working. They are struggling to pay the bills and feed their families. Let's check in with CNN's White House reporter, Sarah Westwood. So, Sarah, the president offered temporary protection for immigrants as part of his major announcement in exchange for the border wall. But Democrats have said this is essentially dead on arrival. So now what?
Well, Fred, we expect Senate Republicans to start moving forward on this bill as soon as Tuesday. But right now, the bill does not have a real path forward because Democrats do still remain dug in behind their refusal to negotiate on any kind of deal while the government is still partially shuttered. Now, under Trump's deal, which he characterized yesterday as an attempt to break the logjam, the president would get $5.7 billion for his border wall in exchange for that one-time 3-year renewal of protections for the young undocumented immigrants known as Dreamers, and a 3-year extension of temporary protected status for the roughly 300,000 immigrants who right now are facing the prospect of their TPS expiring. Trump also requesting some funding for other border security priorities like drug detection technology. House Democrats, though, are already rejecting this proposal. They have their own plan to get the government reopened immediately. It involves passing 6 spending bills this week, and those bills will include $1 billion for border security in general, not for the construction of a border wall. The one thing that Trump and Democrats do seem to agree on, though, is the need for immigration judges. Now, as you mentioned, Trump going on a Twitter storm this morning, lashing out at Speaker Pelosi and accusing her of being beholden to the left wing of the party, while also defending his proposal against the right wing of his own party, as critics from the right wing have accused the president of extending an offer of amnesty in his proposal. But the bottom line is that this is not a new idea. Trading DACA for the wall, it's failed in the past, and although it is an attempt from the White House to peel off some moderate Democrats in order to try to put together a bipartisan coalition of support, Democrats still remain unified behind the idea of not negotiating until the government is reopened. So, Fred, it's not clear that this bill in its current form is the thing that gets the government reopened this week.
All right, Sarah Westwood, thank you so much at the White House. So we're now hearing from top Democratic and Republican lawmakers responding to the president's proposal. Listen.
It was the president who single-handedly took away DACA and TPS protections in the first place. Offering some of those protections that he took away back in exchange for the wall is not a compromise, but hostage-taking.
Yep, it represents progress, not perfection. I talked to the president about this issue for about an hour last week. And if you bring a plan to him that doesn't include a wall, it's dead as 4 o'clock.
All right, let's get reaction now from CNN political commentator Anna Navarro and former South Carolina Lieutenant Governor Andre Bauer. All right, good to see you both. All right, so Anna, you first, you heard from Schumer, who says, we tried this before. He took away something, and now he's putting it back on the table. That's not negotiation. Has the president backed himself into a corner with this offer, giving essentially Democrats an advantage even at the negotiating table? Anna.
Look, I think he is backed into a corner, and I think part of the reason he's backed into a corner is because he's allowed himself to be bullied by some of the right-wing influencers, people like Ann Coulter, like Rush Limbaugh. Once you let yourself be bullied once, you're going to continue being bullied. So we are seeing that even though a lot of Democrats are saying this is unacceptable and dead on arrival, so is Ann Coulter. because she's calling even this very modest proposal amnesty, which it's not.
So who does the president try to appeal to?
Seems to me he's trying to appeal to a very small base, which is even smaller than his base. He's trying to appeal to people like right-wing influentials and people who, influence the way his base feels about him.
So then that doesn't say an urgency to get government.
Then
that says no urgency to get government up and running again.
Right. I mean, I don't think they feel any urgency. I think they feel, I think they'd rather have a position. I think they'd rather, be having this platform. I think they like the power. I think they like the ability to bully the president of the United States. And, and I think they're going to continue on this. They're going to continue saying no to everything. So it makes negotiating for Donald Trump very, very difficult.
So then, Andre, does it show that the president, is the chief negotiator here? I mean, where's the priority? Is it getting government up and running again, or is it, his wall? Is it appealing to, conservative commentators who are giving him a lot of pressure after his major announcement yesterday?
We see this very vastly different. Number one, I don't consider it his wall. I consider it our country's wall. We are a nation of laws. We are a nation of borders. And this country this president made a commitment to the people of this country that he would secure our borders. And that is a priority for him. And he
but polling has shown that the majority of Americans don't want the wall.
Leaders don't run by polls. And that's not true either. But leaders don't govern based on polls. He ran on the premise that he would get a wall for this country. And we know we have thousands upon thousands of people coming over our border. If we're not going to enforce the laws of this country, why do we even have immigration laws anymore? Why do we have immigration offices anymore? I know people that do it the right way, and it is so discouraging to them that they continue to try to go through the laws that we have created to do it the right way, only to be discouraged by people that just continue to pour over our border. But nonetheless, the president has shown leadership by staying in Washington, and he has in good faith made an effort. If you don't like that offer, you come to the table and say, here are where we agree and here's where we disagree, but let's find common ground. Look, I served in the legislature. I worked in the minority. I worked in the majority, and that's how you get things done. And
okay,
quite
but when
frankly,
we look at those
leadership...
when we look at the proposals then that Democrats are saying they're pushing for this week, and even the president's message yesterday, at least one of the areas where it seems both sides are in agreement is trying to have money dedicated for more immigration judges. So if that could be a starting point, then where do you see places of negotiation this week so that all sides will get a little something of what they want? Andre?
Well, number one, when the leader continues to want to leave the country instead of stay here and negotiate, there's no good faith there. And when it's dismissed upon arrival, there's no good faith. There's no working together. What the leadership of the Republican Party is going to have to do is they're going to have to go peel off moderate Democrats, like where I live in Charleston, where we have a newly elected Democrat in a formerly Republican seat who's been a moderate, who didn't vote for the speaker, and say, look, folks, what is it more about your country or is it more about a party? And most of the people of this country do believe you have to have laws that govern the country, and to continue to let illegal people come over with drugs, with a multitude of different things. It's not healthy for our country. You now see the leadership of leaders within the Democrat Party talking about allowing
we've heard from a number of
illegals to
experts
vote.
that the majority of the drug trafficking is not coming. I mean, most of them are coming at legal points of entry. It
That's
has nothing
not
to do
true.
with just the wall
What they've said is they're catching them at the ports. Well, of course they're catching more at the ports because the ones coming over where there's no wall, they don't get caught. That's the easiest place to come. You don't go through the guard gate at the TSA if you're trying to smuggle something. You go through an alternate route. That's exactly what you do if you were coming over the border with something illegal. You wouldn't go right to where law enforcement was and say, let me try to get through here.
So opposing the wall apparently is not the only issue, though. You know, there are Democrats who are expressing their concerns about the way in which all of this is playing out, and they are worried about the president's use of a government shutdown as a tool. Listen.
Let me just also make clear that what the president proposed yesterday, increasing border security, looking at TPS, looking at the Dreamers, I'll use that as a starting point, but you've got to start by opening the government. What we cannot do, and I've actually had Republicans as well recognize this, is that we cannot reward the kind of behavior of hostage taking, because if the president can arbitrarily shut down the government now, he will do it time and again.
So, Anna, why can't all of these things be worked out with government up and running? That's his point.
I think they should be. I think they should be because there is way too many Americans who are hurting because of this shutdown. If you travel through the United States, if you go through an airport, you will get stopped by TSA agents. These people are not getting paid. They're showing up to work and they're not getting paid. Americans have seen images this week that I had only seen coming out of communist Russia or communist Cuba. Americans having to make lines for food. But these are not, Americans in need. These are federal workers. They should not be making these type of lines. Being a federal worker should not be like having to make a bread line in a communist country in the United States in 2019. That is shameful. It is embarrassing. Look, there is a lot of common ground here. I hear Democrats say we're for border security. I hear Republicans say we're for border security. So Republicans want a wall. Democrats want to do it in some other ways, and a wall where in instances where the wall is the best method. Republicans want DACA. Democrats want DACA. Now, this temporary fix of DACA is ridiculous. We cannot continue using these kids who came here through no fault of their own, kids who are American in every way but one, who love this country, are willing to contribute, are willing to serve this country. We cannot continue year after year after year to leave them in limbo and continue using them as political pawns in this chess game. They need a permanent fix for their lives. They need to know what their lives are going to be like and where they're going to be able to pursue their dreams.
And Andre,
and folks should go read the transcripts of the El Chapo trial going on now and learn, where these drugs, where the biggest drug trafficker in Mexico and how he was getting those drugs into the United States. It was through legal ports of entry. So if we really want to address that, and we all should, there are ways to do it. You want to really address undocumented illegal immigration? Most of it comes through planes and then overstay their visas, and we haven't been able to figure it out.
And Andre, on the issue of security on so many levels, perhaps you heard my interview with a federal prison worker earlier who said security is being made that much more vulnerable with government being shut down, with workers being asked to work without pay, the distractions that come with worrying about, how to put food on the table and how to pay rent and mortgage. That is jeopardizing security for particularly jobs where security should be the primary focus.
I find it interesting that Democrats are adamantly opposed to this shutdown now, but when they were forcing Obamacare down, the majority of the people in the country that didn't want this bill talk about polling,
that issue of security and if it is being jeopardized
a shutdown,
by way of shutting down
government. They used a shutdown. The President Obama used a shutdown. The very people that were against the shutdown then were for it before. So I would say the first thing is, and I think Anna would agree with me, every single member of that United States Congress should not take a paycheck till this issue is resolved. The fact that they're collecting a paycheck and other federal employees aren't, to me, is egregious as well. They all ought to have to be locked in a room. When I was in the legislature, we would invoke a rule that was called 3B, and you stayed there and you found a way to find common ground and you resolved the issue. And the United States Congress ought to do that right now. They shouldn't be taking trips. They shouldn't be going anywhere. They should all be in that Capitol right now taking care of the people's business and finding a way to find enough common ground to get people back to work and to get us a border at the southern part of this country.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Andre Bauer, Ana Navarro, thanks to both of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, did President Trump's personal attorney just put him in more legal peril? Rudy Giuliani has seemingly opened the door for the possibility that Trump spoke to Michael Cohen about his congressional testimony. President Trump's personal attorney is weighing in today on possible obstruction of justice. Rudy Giuliani says the president is innocent, but admits he may have talked with Michael Cohen about his congressional testimony. This latest admission comes just days after Giuliani told CNN members of the Trump campaign may have colluded with Russia. He spoke at length with our Jake Tapper today about obstruction, Michael Cohen's testimony, and the plans for Trump Tower, Moscow. Listen.
Did President Trump or anyone on the Trump team talk to Michael Cohen about his congressional testimony before he gave congressional testimony or after he gave congressional testimony?
I can tell you, first of all, I wasn't the lawyer at the time.
Right.
Michael Cohen's lawyers reviewed his testimony with him.
Yeah, but
I'm sure
President Trump
No, let me answer the question.
Okay.
As far as I know, President Trump did not have discussions with him, certainly had no discussions with him in which he told him or counseled him to lie. If he had any discussions with him, they'd be about the version of the events that Michael Cohen gave then, which they all believe was true. I believed it was true. I still believe it may be true because unlike these people who want us to believe him, I believe Michael Cohen is a serial liar.
You just acknowledged that it's possible that President Trump talked to Michael
Cohen. Perfectly normal, which
so
the president believed was true.
So it's possible that that happened, that President Trump talked to Michael Cohen.
I don't know if it happened or didn't happen. And it might be attorney-client privileged if it happened, where I can't acknowledge it. But I have no knowledge that he spoke to him. But I'm telling you, I wasn't there then.
So
it's not significant because the version he gave to the...
But he's convicted of, I mean, one of the things he pleaded guilty to, I believe, is lying to Congress about the Trump Tower deal.
Which time?
Well, I'm talking,
you can pick your time.
Right, but about the Trump Tower deal.
But he's pleading guilty to get a reduced sentence, which means he's saying what the prosecutor wants him to say.
But you just acknowledged that President Trump might have talked to him about his testimony.
And so what if he talked to him about it?
Is it not possible that Michael Cohen had that conversation? And I'm just asking you for what happened or what didn't happen.
It's not possible.
That President Michael Cohen left the conversation thinking, well, this is what the boss wants me to say. The boss wants me to say.
Not possible. The guy driving this testimony was Michael Cohen. In other words, you and I are in a deal together. You're the guy running it. I'm the guy that's sitting back there doing 50 other things. When it comes time to remember what happens, I go to you, and you tell me what happened. I don't tell you what happened.
Well,
so Michael Cohen was telling people what happened. I don't know if the president was briefed by him or wasn't. He certainly was briefed by his lawyers, all attorney-client privilege. But I can tell you this. Michael Cohen's lawyers believed him at the time.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't the president believe him?
In his written answers.
He knew what happened. Michael Cohen was the guy in charge of this. I emphasize that.
Right.
President Trump was running for president. So when this comes down and everybody's in a joint defense agreement, you go to Michael Cohen, you say, Michael, what happened?
Right.
Michael's going to remember a lot better what happened than Donald Trump, where this was like this big in his recollection, and it's this big in Michael's.
Right. So, but let me ask you a question.
And what you're doing is so unfair.
This part you were the lawyer for. In his lawyer for Trump for. In his written answers, President Trump's written answers to special counsel Robert Mueller's questions, what did President Trump have to say about the Trump-Moscow project?
He acknowledged that they had conversations about it throughout 2015, 2016.
Through November 2016. And, through November.
He answered.
Right? That's what you said
he answered those questions. He answered those questions fully, and I think to the satisfaction of the special counsel. So I'm not at all concerned about that. He gave a full and complete answer to it. I can't share the whole thing with you, but I can share the conclusion, which is he had conversations with Michael Cohen, but it was Michael Cohen driving the project. As, of course, anybody who's being fair-minded would understand. He was running, I emphasize, for president of the United States, tied up 18 hours a day with that.
Right.
If he could devote a minute a day to this, it'd be a lot. So it would be a minute here, a minute there, a minute here. Your recollection of that is not going to be that strong.
So let me ask you,
the guy running the deal is going to remember it.
All right, joining me right now to talk further about what we just heard, former federal prosecutors Renato Mariotti and Shan Wu. Good to see you both. So, the legal definition of obstruction of justice is, here it is, willfully interfering with the process of justice and law, especially by influencing, threatening, harming, or impeding a witness. So Shan, Rudy Giuliani says that Michael Cohen may have discussed what he was going to say with the president, but says the president, didn't tell him to lie, and he goes back and forth on whether he's certain whether that conversation would have happened or not. But if it were to happen, would that be obstruction?
That depends on what was said. What's particularly ridiculous about what Giuliani is saying, and obviously this is not lawyering, I'm sure Renato will agree, this is PR strategy. I mean, for him to say that it's absolutely normal for him to have spoken to Cohen is just completely crazy. I mean, the last thing you would ever tell your client to do is to go ahead and speak to that guy who's going to be testifying in Congress, speak to that guy who's under investigation where they raided his office. That would violate rules 1 through 20 of criminal defense because it's so obvious that the investigators would be looking at you. So it really depends on what he said, but this spin that is perfectly fine, is perfectly normal for him to be talking to him, is nothing more than spin.
And so, Renato, it's unusual or strange to have such discussions, particularly because President Trump is, individual A. He's a subject. He is involved in the investigation in which Michael Cohen would be asked about, and that's what would make it inappropriate.
That's right. Well, also, he knew that Michael Cohen was himself under investigation and was a witness in matters involving him. So when I represent clients who are under investigation, I routinely tell them not to speak to people who are potential witnesses against them, not to speak to other people who are a part of that same investigation, for exactly this reason. You have to expect that if there are conversations between people who are subject to the investigation before there's testimony, of course the prosecutor is going to look to see whether there was obstruction. Now, Shan is completely correct that what matters there is the context of the conversation, but essentially what's happened is that by having these conversations, if Giuliani is correct in what he said, that he's opened himself up, Trump has, to more investigation and more prosecutors looking at exactly what he told Michael Cohen and when.
And Shan, Giuliani also admitted, in this interview that Michael Cohen and Donald Trump had discussions about the Moscow Trump Tower project, but said that Michael Cohen was running things, and even though there were discussions in 2015 and a good part of 2016. So his defense is that the president probably didn't remember the details of those conversations. He also says it's not a deal until it's finalized. It's just a plan, not really a project. Is that right?
Well, the fact that they're now admitting that there were conversations well into 2016 is in and of itself quite the bombshell, because that's something they really tried to stay away from before. And the whole notion that it's okay for him to be talking about that so close to the time where he's actually going to be president is really sort of a preposterous situation. So that in and of itself, I think, is something that Giuliani is really trying to mask here, and it's important for us not to lose sight of that in what they're talking about.
So Renato, Roger Stone, associate Jerome Corsi may be called to testify in front of a Senate hearing, and he says he has turned down a deal with the special counsel. Rudy Giuliani says he knows all about the deal and discussions between Corsi and the prosecutors because he processes leaked documents in the case. So about that issue of why it's okay, Rudy Giuliani, to receive these leaked documents, but there's great criticism if anyone else receives any leaked documents and uses it to their advantage.
Yeah, I've got to say, if what you're suggesting is that Giuliani is being hypocritical, that really doesn't surprise me at all. He is very much throughout this investigation appears to be winging it as far as I'm concerned. Mr. Corsi is somebody who is perhaps the only person involved in this investigation acting more bizarrely than Mr. Giuliani. Corsi is tweeting out attacks on Mueller, and it's articulating various conspiracy theories regarding Mueller. And in fact, if what Mr. Corsi himself says is correct, he is under criminal investigation. Mueller is preparing to indict him. So the last thing he should be doing is testifying or giving documents to anyone or having any conversations about this. He should hire a competent attorney who I have questions about the attorney he's hired now, and he should remain silent. And frankly, Giuliani is not doing his client any favors. He might be better off exercising his right to remain silent as well.
And Shan, as of now, Michael Cohen is scheduled to testify February 7th, before a House committee. But apparently reportedly he is, rethinking that. What are the potential ramifications if he decides not to accept that offer, or at least, remove himself from his initial, offer that he would do it? What's at stake?
He needs to think very carefully about that. There's already been talk that the special counsel is going to limit what he can testify to. So he needs to be very careful about appearing in public. And again, testifying under oath. Anytime you're under oath, you're exposing yourself again to potential false statements or perjury situations. Everyone has to be careful here, because if we look at the historical lesson of Iran-Contra, you don't want him testifying to something in Congress that he's been essentially given a pass on in the criminal investigation. Creates all sorts of issues. One last thing, Frederica, to Renato's point of the hypocrisy of Giuliani, or kind of talking out both sides of his mouth, you notice how often he emphasizes that Cohen would be the guy who knows everything. Trump's way too busy. But at the same time, he picks and chooses when you want to listen to Cohen. And Cohen's the guy that is the go-to guy who knows everything. We should be listening to Cohen.
All right, Shan Wu, Renato Mariotti, thank you so much. A lot of mental gymnastics going on here. All right, coming up, A bitter blast of sub-zero winter weather. Millions of Americans dealing with bone-chilling Arctic air. We'll take you to the storm zone next. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this Sunday. I'm Frederica Whitfield. We start with President Trump's personal attorney trying to split hairs on what constitutes obstruction of justice. Rudy Giuliani refuting reports that the president instructed Michael Cohen to lie to Congress, but also admitting that the president may have talked with Cohen in detail about what exactly he was planning to say in that testimony. Giuliani spoke at length with our Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union.
Did President Trump or anyone on the Trump team talk to Michael Cohen about his congressional testimony before he gave congressional testimony or after he gave congressional testimony?
I can tell you, first of all, I wasn't the lawyer at the time.
Right.
Michael Cohen's lawyers reviewed his testimony with him.
Yeah, but
I'm sure
President Trump
No, let me answer the question.
Okay.
As far as I know, President Trump did not have discussions with him, certainly had no discussions with him in which he told him or counseled him to lie. If he had any discussions with him, they'd be about the version of the events that Michael Cohen gave then, which they all believe was true. I believed it was true. I still believe it may be true because unlike these people who want to just believe him, I believe Michael Cohen is a serial liar.
You just acknowledged that it's possible that President Trump talked to Michael Cohen about his testimony.
Which would be perfectly normal, which the president believed was true.
So it's possible that that happened? That President Trump talked to Michael Cohen about his testimony?
I don't know if it happened or didn't happen. And it might be attorney-client privileged if it happened, where I can't acknowledge it. But I have no knowledge that he spoke to him. But I'm telling you, I wasn't there then.
So
it's not significant because the version he gave to the...
But he's convicted of, one of the things he pleaded guilty to, I believe, is lying to Congress about the Trump Tower deal.
Which time?
Well, I'm talking.
You can pick your time.
Right, but about the Trump Tower deal.
But he's pleading guilty to get a reduced sentence, which means he's saying what the prosecutor wants him to say.
But you just acknowledged that President Trump might have talked to him about his testimony.
And so what if he talked to him about it?
Is it not possible that Michael Cohen had that conversation? And I'm just asking you for what happened or what didn't happen.
It's not possible.
That Michael Cohen left the conversation thinking, well, this is what the boss wants me to say. The boss wants me to say.
Not possible. The guy driving this testimony was Michael Cohen. In other words, you and I are in a deal together. You're the guy running it. I'm the guy that's sitting back there doing 50 other things. When it comes time to remember what happens, I go to you, and you tell me what happened. I don't tell you what happened.
Well,
so Michael Cohen was telling people what happened. I don't know if the president was briefed by him or wasn't. He certainly was briefed by his lawyers, all attorney-client privilege. But I can tell you this. Michael Cohen's lawyers believed him at the time.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't the president believe him?
In his written answers.
He knew what happened. Michael Cohen was the guy in charge of this. I emphasize that.
Right.
President Trump was running for president. So when this comes down and everybody's in a joint defense agreement, you go to Michael Cohen, you say, Michael, what happened?
Right.
Michael's going to remember a lot better what happened than Donald Trump, where this was like this big in his recollection, and it's this big in Michael's.
Right. So, but let me ask you a question.
And what you're doing is so unfair.
This part you were the lawyer for. In his written answers, President Trump's written answers to Special Counsel Robert Mueller's questions, what did President Trump have to say about the Trump-Moscow project?
He acknowledged that they had conversations about it throughout 2015, 2016.
Through November 2016.
And
through November.
He answered.
Right? That's what you said
he
before.
answered those questions. He answered those questions fully, and I think to the satisfaction of the special counsel. So I'm not at all concerned about that. He gave a full and complete answer to it. I can't share the whole thing with you, but I can share the conclusion, which is he had conversations with Michael Cohen, but it was Michael Cohen driving the project. As, of course, anybody who's being fair-minded would understand. He was running, I emphasize, for president of the United States, tied up 18 hours a day with that.
Right.
If he could devote a minute a day to this, it'd be a lot. So it would be a minute here, a minute there, a minute here. Your recollection of that is not going to be that strong.
So let me ask you,
the guy running the deal is going to remember it.
All right, joining me right now from Memphis is Tennessee Congressman Steve Cohen, Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. Thanks so much for being with us on this Sunday. So let's begin with what we just heard, from President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani. He says the president never instructed Michael Cohen to lie in this congressional testimony, but does admit that they may have discussed what Cohen was going to say. So what do you do with this information from his personal attorney, Giuliani?
both Giuliani and Trump are untrustworthy. They have a record of misstatements and lies that go back for Trump to all his public life. Giuliani, it's just since he joined Trump. So it's difficult to accept what they say, but it's clear that Trump talked to Michael Cohen, that he had interest in the Moscow deal right up to the edge of the election. And
do you see that as potentially obstruction?
The goal line is moved. I think it could be obstruction. I think we're going to see a lot of obstruction of justice, and I think we're going to see a lot of collusion. I think the Mueller report is going to be eye-opening to a lot of people who have unfortunately put a lot of faith into the President Trump.
Michael Cohen also admitted, that he lied about how late into the campaign that he talked with President Trump about the Trump Tower project in Moscow. Giuliani, he didn't even dispute that, but says it doesn't really matter because President Trump probably didn't remember the discussions anyway. He also confirmed that the president, was asked about it by the special counsel. So did you know that that was among the questions from the special counsel?
No, I didn't actually know that that was one of the questions, no.
And now that we're hearing that from his personal attorney, how does this, equip those in the House who either say now it's a time to, move ahead with impeachment proceedings or at the very least, wait for Mueller's findings with bated breath? We're
going to have hearings. We're going to have hearings in both judiciary and government oversight on all of these issues concerning obstruction and the emoluments clause, abuse of power, that have been levied in the media and in court filings about Trump. I think we're going to find out that there has been, in fact, violations of all of those the emoluments clause, and there's been obstruction, and there's been abuse of power, and I think that will eventually lead to impeachment hearings. But I think the first thing you do is have to gather your facts. I think we can gather them without Mueller's help, but I think Robert Mueller's report is going to be very, very, very eye-opening.
And are you encouraged that you will receive the full report or, at the very least, a synopsis from, based on what we heard from the nominee for Attorney General William Barr? He believes that at least portions of it should be made public.
I was disappointed and with Barr's testimony. The Attorney General has discretion over whether to release that even to Congress. And I think it should be released except for the parts that intelligence, our intelligence folks say need to be redacted to protect sources and methods. We should see it all. And I think maybe that's the deal we should make with Trump on his border wall. He gives us the entire report redacted only by CIA folks, and he gives it to Congress and to the American public. And that might be the deal, and he agrees to have that be seen in public. I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, and now that brings us to then the offer the president made yesterday on the wall, and what he's hoping Republican senators will be voting on this week and eventually go to the House. Are you feeling like there is negotiations underway, or do you feel that the president is not making room for any negotiations from Democrats?
I think it's an opening salvo. I think he did it partially because of the paychecks that are due out Tuesday, and he knows he's going to get more political hurt because of that. And I think he did it because Nancy Pelosi had her trip and trip is the wrong word probably, but her journey to Afghanistan, which is no place you really want to go, but you go out of a sense of duty, and he wanted it to be so to make it look like this was important for the speaker to be there to respond to his proposal. If you do anything with the DACA, it needs to be a permanent path to citizenship, and it doesn't need to be 3 years, and it doesn't need to be and I'll be surprised if the Senate passes even what he's proposed. We'll see, but I'll be surprised if it passes the Senate. But it's going to be a difficult slog. But to get the full funding for his wall, which is unnecessary. And you remember, the Mexicans were going to pay for it. Who's going to pay for it? Mexico. We've forgotten all about that. Now it's the American taxpayers and the American government employees who are being held hostage for paying for the wall. The wall's up where it needs to be, and barriers are up where they need to be. And what we need is technology, more money, and personnel. And the Democrats have offered more money for immigration courts, more money at the ports of entry for technology, more money for drones. And those are things we need to offer. And they're in the president's proposal. He could accept part of a loaf, but he wants to have his wall. His wall is just something he's got. It's a political promise he made, but the promise was the Mexicans were going to pay for it.
So the House Speaker...
all you Trumpers out there, don't forget he lied to you.
The House Speaker made it very clear not long after her swearing in. She said there's no money for the wall. The Vice President, Pence was asked earlier today on CBS, whether the President and when the last time the President has negotiated face-to-face with Pelosi, with Schumer, and the Vice President said that, the President bypassed Democratic leadership in negotiations and instead went to the rank and file. Why? What do you see?
He didn't go to the rank and file. He tried to get some of the quote-unquote problem solvers to come out and be for him, but they said that we need to open the government first, which he didn't do. He tried to get some of the people who had been elected from Trump districts to come to the White House. They refused. Basically, he went to Jared Kushner and Mike Pence and said, what can we throw out here to make the Democrats look bad on the eve of these checks being given out?
Are you any more encouraged? Are you any more encouraged that all sides are closer to a deal so as to get government up and running again, or do you see a stalemate?
We need to get the government up and running. I've met with our employees, our government employees who are out of paychecks and still working, and it's a difficult situation. But remember this, that the Trump budget and the Trump tax scam put us $3 trillion more in debt. We don't have the monies we need right now for a giant infrastructure package, for health care for our people, and for public education, and for people with disabilities. To put $5.7 billion into a useless wall just to give the president his political needs and his personal little pet project is wrong. We have less money than ever before because of the tax scam that gave so much money to the upper 2%, just hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars to the wealthiest people, the Mar-a-Lago set, and we need that money for other things. We can do so much with research, with health care, with education, and we don't need to be wasting that money on a wall.
In your view, quickly, is the ball in the Democrats' court?
The ball's really in the president's court. The president's supposed to be running the government. That's what he takes an oath to do, and that's his job as chief executive, is to keep the government open and running and working. And he has failed 30 days into a shutdown. It's the Trump shutdown. The Democrats and Republicans, both in Congress, Article 1, we appropriate the money. Yes, he can veto it, but he needs to, the Senate should have passed the bills which we've passed to open the government. We've done it 8 times. Given them to the president. If he wanted to veto them, go through the process and see if we can override vetoes, get the government opened without the wall. It's possible we could have done that. But Mitch McConnell has become the Mitch shutdown as well, because he hadn't put the votes up in the Senate and he hasn't gone through the process. The government is supposed to be operated by the chief executive, and he has failed to do his job and carry out the laws.
All right, Tennessee Congressman Steve Cohen, thanks so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Still ahead. Government shutdown, day 30, 800,000 federal workers, most still not getting paid, and the longer this drags on, the bigger security risks the country faces. Next, a federal prison worker who says he is risking his life without getting paid a dime. We are in day 30 of the longest partial U.S. government shutdown in history, and still no end in sight. President Trump is on the attack, blaming Democrats and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi after his proposal to end the shutdown was shot down before he even made the announcement. Pelosi called it unacceptable and a non-starter. Now lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are weighing in.
Yep, it represents progress, not perfection. I talked to the president about this issue for about an hour last week. And if you bring a plan to him that doesn't include a wall, it's dead as 4 o'clock.
Let me just also make clear that what the president proposed yesterday, increasing border security, looking at TPS, looking at the Dreamers, I'll use that as a starting point, but you've got to start by opening the government. What we cannot do, and I've actually had Republicans as well recognize this, is that we cannot reward the kind of behavior of hostage taking.
So negotiations are still at square one, and as politicians play the blame game, real people are feeling the impacts caught right in the middle of this mess. 800,000 federal workers, most of them still not getting paid, many still working. They are struggling to pay their bills and feed their families. And for them, this shutdown is 30 days too long. Let's check in with CNN's White House reporter Sarah Westwood. So the president, offered temporary protection for immigrants in exchange for his border wall as part of his proposal, his big announcement yesterday. But Democrats have said this is dead on arrival. So where does it go from here? Is the president inviting, Democratic leadership to the White House to hash it out?
Well, Fred, the White House says Democrats, they have an open invitation to come to the White House when they're ready to negotiate on his terms. But at the moment, we expect Senate Republicans to start moving on this proposal as soon as Tuesday. But right now, it looks like this bill won't have a path forward because Democrats remain dug in on their refusal to negotiate on any kind of deal until the government is reopened. Now, the president yesterday rolling out what he called an attempt to get Democrats back to the negotiating table. His deal would get him $5.7 billion for a border wall. It would involve him conceding on a 3-year renewal of DACA protections for those young undocumented immigrants known as Dreamers, as well as a 3-year extension of the temporary protected status for roughly 300,000 immigrants who currently are covered by TPS. And it included a request for more funds for other border security priorities like drug detection equipment, more immigration judges. Democrats, though, rejecting that proposal before the president even announced it, saying they want to reopen the government immediately. They have a package of 6 spending bills they plan to bring forward this week. In those bills will be $1 billion for border security in general, not for the construction of a border wall. One thing Democrats and Trump do seem to agree on, though, is the need for more immigration judges. But at the moment, this attempt to peel some of those moderate Democrats off of Democratic leadership doesn't appear to be working. Fred, Democrats still seem to be unified in their opposition to Trump's immigration agenda.
All right, Sarah Westwood, thanks so much. All right, let's bring in Margaret Tlaib, senior White House correspondent for Bloomberg News, and Daniel Dale, Washington bureau chief for the Toronto Star. Good to see both of you.
Hey, Fred.
All right, so Margaret, you first. Republican senators could begin voting on this president's proposal as early as Tuesday, as we heard Sarah say. In the meantime, is it probable, that Trump will actually meet with Democratic leadership to get a consensus, especially with Democrats saying, that plan he announced is dead on arrival? I know he says the door is open, but it's a matter of, 4 party leadership, representatives and the president hashing it out, kind of old-fashioned style.
Yeah, Fred, I spent all day yesterday at the White House, both for the president's remarks and speaking with top officials like the vice president and the chief of staff, Jared Kushner also, and the legislative affairs director. And I left there not entirely clear on whether the White House's strategy is primarily to force actual negotiations to complete a resolution to the wall by the end of this week, or whether the primary objective is to change the onus and the messaging ahead of the timing on this next federal workers' paycheck that's about to be missed. Certainly, it doesn't seem that what was proposed, given the temporary nature of the DACA fix, given the sort of shrunken parameters of who it would affect, is meant to actually be the deal. But it does seem like, at a bare minimum, the White House's interest is understanding that there'll be another paycheck at the end of this week. The interest is in at least putting the onus on Democrats, or trying to, from a message perspective, if that happens. But I do think, nonetheless, that it certainly seems that some elements of what the president said, the idea that this isn't good, he's not talking about a 2,000-mile coast-to-coast wall, some of those elements suggest that the White House may be acknowledging some of the pressure they're facing, and that
it's willing to be pliable. Willing to be pliable to a certain degree?
It's possible.
Okay, so Daniel, if part of the strategy, as Margaret was saying, if it wasn't clear, part of the inference was, the White House trying to change the narrative, saying, okay, we at least put the offer out there, and now it's, up to the Democrats to come to the table. But, is that really the case when already most Americans don't believe in the wall, don't support the wall? His approval ratings are, going down, and most Americans are blaming the president for the shutdown.
Precisely. So I think this is an attempt to get fewer Americans to blame him and more Americans to blame Democrats. If indeed McConnell holds a vote, and even if he doesn't, Trump will be able to say and hope, headline writers and media outlets cover it this way, that look, I made a good faith effort to compromise. It's the Democrats who are holding this up. Republicans voted for this, Democrats didn't. But I don't know if that'll work. I mean, I think many Americans will understand that this was never a so-called compromise that was actually hashed out as a compromise with Democrats. This was a weak offer by a president who's playing a weak hand. And so I think Democrats have made their point very clearly to Americans that, if they are going to make some sort of trade involving DACA, it has to be a stronger offer with regard to DACA. It has to be some sort of permanent fix, not a 3-year Band-Aid solution. So I think this is more likely a messaging effort than a real effort to end the shutdown, but I'm just not sure it's going to work even as a messaging effort.
All right, well, listen to this is what the president had to say when he was, speaking directly to Democrats making his offer.
In recent weeks, we have met with large numbers of Democrat lawmakers to hear their ideas and suggestions. By incorporating the priorities of rank-and-file Democrats in our plan, we hope they will offer their enthusiastic support, and I think many will. This is a common-sense compromise both parties should embrace.
So Margaret, you heard the president say, he reached out to talk to rank and file. You heard the vice president today say rank and file, not necessarily to the leadership, of the Democratic Party. But then also today, House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Representative Benny Thompson said, that's not enough. He said while he and other Democrats won't rule out, a wall completely, they will go for barriers. He also says the president keeps changing, the game. Listen.
I'm saying that we will sit with the chief, the president, or whomever, and we'll work through it.
So you wouldn't rule out a wall?
I would not rule out a wall in certain instances. But clearly Democrats are for border security, but we're not for this constantly moving the ball just for a talking point. Mr. President, Democrats will work with you, but you can't pick what Democrats you work with. We have picked our leaders, and you have to work with our leaders.
So Margaret, he's essentially saying, it's back to square one. Let's start over, do over, and let's begin with leadership talking to leadership.
Well, certainly the White House, the president, of course, he can try to pick off any Democrats he wants. Any White House would try to do that when the leadership isn't doing what they want him to. The difference is this: the president, the Democrat who holds the most leverage and power right now is Nancy Pelosi, and the president is not trying to work directly with her. He is trying to work through the Senate.
And that's a problem, right? That's a problem.
It's only a problem if it doesn't work. I mean, what they're trying to do, and it was clear from yesterday, what they're trying to do is pick off enough Democratic senators in swing states or in elections that have been close and people who may face re-election in the 2020 cycle, or try to incorporate ideas that they have put out there before in the past. I think on the barrier or the wall issue, maybe the meeting place in the middle, Democrats hope, is the idea of, addressing ports of entry or drones or that sort of technology rather than beautiful, shiny, steel slat barriers. But the president has made this such an underpinning of his pledge to his base that in the end, I think it's almost impossible still to see how a compromise works unless Republican lawmakers in Congress kind of force the president's hand on a compromise. So I think we're probably closer than we were yesterday, but it's not entirely clear on precisely when this shutdown ends and how.
So, Danielle, it looks like the president's also caught in a really tough place because he's not able to appeal to Democratic leadership thus far. At the same time, he's finding out very quickly that he's not really appealing to conservatives either, including like commentators Ann Coulter, even Iowa's Congressman, Steve King, who have been weighing in via tweet, very critical, of what the president had to say in terms about, extending, offers to, DACA recipients. But the vice president, is still defending the president this way.
The president has said that we will support temporary relief for 3 years for DACA recipients and those who are in temporary protected status. This is not amnesty. There's no pathway to citizenship. There's no, there's no, permanent status here at all.
So is the president, in a tight corner? He's trying to figure out who to please.
He is a little bit, but honestly, I think we can overstate the importance of people like Ann Coulter and websites like Breitbart, and we can treat them as sort of spokespeople for Trump's base. But I think what has been shown definitively is that Trump's base is willing to roll with him. It's not as ideological on immigration as someone like Ann Coulter is. For example, when Trump first started talking positively about protecting DACA recipients, when they first tried to make a deal a while ago, something like 88, or like in the high 80s, up to 90% of Republican voters in polls said they were now supportive of protections for DACA recipients, which was a big change from their stance in the Obama era. So I think when Trump takes a position, much of the conservative base and certainly elected Republicans are willing to roll with him. But I also think it's kind of ironic that they're now being accused of offering a sort of amnesty and being forced to say this is not amnesty, because for so long, many Republicans have described any protection for people like DACA recipients as amnesty. Democrats have said, no, there's no, path to citizenship here. This is merely a sort of this is a semi-protection, and now it's the vice president being forced to make the kind of no amnesty argument that people like Barack Obama had been forced to make in years past.
All right, Daniel Dale, Margaret Tlaib, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so what about the people who are directly impacted by this shutdown? Next, a federal penitentiary worker joining me as the shutdown threatens security at some of the nation's prisons. Why he says he no longer feels safe.